Good Shabbos. This week's portion is Yisro, and the main subject in the portion is the receiving of the Torah on Mount Sinai. And when the Jews are ready to accept the Torah, it actually says that they went out to meet God, Vayisyatzvu b'tachtas hahar, and they gathered at the bottom of the mountain. And there's a very famous medrash, which is not necessarily understanding the text in a simple, literal, contextual manner, which means that they were at the bottom of the mountain. But the word tachtas means underneath, literally. And therefore the Medrash says that no, what really happened was God uprooted the mountain, kafu aleim har kagigas, and he then took the mountain and placed it over the heads of the Jewish people like a pot or a barrel. And he warned them, if you accept the Torah mutav, it's good. And if not, sham tehei kfuraschem, there will be your burial place. So literally the Jewish people had no choice but to accept the Torah. The problem with this idea is that it contradicts another idea in another medrash, which says that the Jews accepted the Torah willingly. Because in Parshas Mishpatim, next week's portion, it says that when the Jews were responding to Moshe, whether they're going to accept the Torah, they said, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do, and then we will listen. And it says that the angels gave the Jewish people two crowns, one for the word Na'aseh, that we will do, and one for the word Nishma, that we will listen. Why? Because they're saying that even before they heard what the Torah said, they're willing to do it. In other words, they were so willing to follow the direction of God that they, even though they didn't understand, they didn't know the details, eventually we'll know the details and we're happy whatever is told to us. Now you could understand that as, yes, after they were forced, of course they said, we'll do whatever you say. But the Medrash that interprets that says no, that they were rewarded for that. This was a great thing that they were willing to accept the Torah without knowing. So it seems that there's a conflict. Again, you could argue that these two different midrashim are two different approaches in the Torah, and it's not necessarily a contradiction. But if you want to harmonize both, you have to deal with the fact that it seems to be a real contradiction. And the way many commentaries understand this is that, yes, the Jewish people were forced, but they really weren't forced in the sense that God actually literally picked the mountain up, although that's what the Medrash says, but rather it's saying that under the situation, they had no choice. Why? Because if you look at the verses immediately preceding this sentence that says that they gathered underneath the mountain, it says on the third day in their preparation, there was thunder and lightning, and there was a heavy cloud on the mountain, and the sound of the shofar was very powerful. Vayechrad kol ha'am asher b'machne, the entire people that were in the camp shuddered. And then it says Moshe went out to the people to meet God, and they gathered underneath the mountain, as we said previously, and the Mount Sinai was full of smoke because God had descended on the mountain with fire, and the smoke went up like the smoke of a furnace. Vayechrad kol har ma'od, and the mountain trembled very much, and the sound of the shofar went and was very powerful. And under those circumstances, everybody or anybody who was in that situation would be petrified. And God is saying, I want to give you the Torah. And of course, they're going to say yes, Na'aseh v'nishma. But it doesn't mean they didn't do it willingly. It just means that there was, not that they were forced, that God was threatening them with the thunder and the lightning. The thunder and lightning were just, in a sense, a show to show the power of God. Again, you could interpret it that the power of God put fear into them, but I think another possible interpretation, which is suggested by many commentaries, is that they were overwhelmed with the emotion of how great God is. If you think of it, an analogy would be a couple falling in love. A man meets a woman under great circumstances. They're both dressed very nicely. They act, of course, on like a first date. They're not going to show their true selves, and they're overwhelmed with this love at first sight. And the man says to the woman, please marry me, hopefully not after the first date. Marry me, whatever you want, I will do. Naaseh v'nishma, I'll do whatever you say. I'm so in love with you. You're so amazing. You're so the emotions are so overwhelming. I have no choice. And in a sense, that's what's happening here. Perhaps the Jewish people were taken out of Egypt. God did great miracles for them in Egypt. Then he split the sea and wiped out the Egyptian army. They're coming to Mount Sinai, and again they see the power of God. It's completely overwhelming. Who wouldn't say, wow, this is amazing. I have to fall in line with whatever God says. Not because I'm afraid for my life, although again I say that might be a possibility, but because the emotions are going to be so overwhelming for us that we don't feel we have a choice. And therefore, for example, we're coming up to the holiday of Purim. It says there that the Jews were accepted the Torah. Again, a midrashic interpretation of some words in the Megillah, that they accepted the Torah now mitoch ahava, out of love, and not mitoch yir, not out of fear. And again, fear doesn't necessarily mean that they were afraid to be hurt, as much as the overwhelming emotions that they were awestruck. Fear could also be being awestruck. When you're so awestruck, you're going to do whatever you're asked. You're going to do whatever it takes to be part of this a relationship, whether with God, with the Jewish people, with a husband, with a wife. But but that's not really an intellectual understanding. Intellectual understanding is afterwards, when time goes by and years have gone by and the emotions are not there. You're not overwhelmed with the situation at hand, but rather you sit and you have time to understand, to study, to know, to have a feel for the relationship, whether that's with a husband or wife or with God and religion. That's when the decision is mitoch ava. That's when it's out of love. When the love is not just a love at first sight, but rather a love which has a strong foundation, that's when it really counts. And in a sense, that's what it's saying here. And the Jewish people at first were just overwhelmed. And that helps explain a lot of the things that go on in the Torah. They're going to serve the golden calf. They're going to complain to God because they're almost like children. It was just that it struck them and they were wow. But then after a few days, a few months, or a few years, when you settle down, you don't necessarily have that same feeling anymore. Our job and our responsibility in life is to make sure that our decisions in general in life, but particularly in terms of religion, are not just because we're wowed into something. It's important to have that feeling, to have that emotion, to have it wash over us. But we also have to then sit down. We have to study. We have to think. We have to understand. We have to know what these laws are, what the Torah is, what religion is all about, how we view God, what is our belief. And then when we accept it at that point, that's when we're accepting mitoch ava, out of love of God and not out of fear of God. Good Shabbos.